In the sun-drenched village of Jufra, along the winding Gambia River in West Africa, the year was 1750 when a boy named Kunta Kinte drew his first breath under the watchful eyes of the ancestors. Born to Amaro and Binta Kinte, proud Mandinka warriors and farmers, he grew beneath baobab trees heavy with ancient wisdom, learning the rhythms of the Quran, the strength of the wrestling circle, and the unbreakable bonds of family. Here, life pulsed with freedom, the call to prayer at dawn, the laughter of siblings, the stories of griots echoing through the night. Kunta was no ordinary youth. He was destined for manhood, a guardian of his people's honor. In the heart of West Africa, along the serpentine bends of the Gambia River where the water shimmered like polished obsidian under the relentless sun, lay the village of Jufra. It was a place of red earth and resilient spirit, where clusters of mud brick compounds with conical thatch roofs huddled together like extended families under the vast sky. Massive baobab trees, ancient sentinels with trunks as wide as elephant herds, stood sentinel over the village, their gnarled branches reaching toward the heavens as if holding secrets from the ancestors. Around 1750, in this vibrant Mandinka community, a child was born to Amaro Kinte, a strong and respected farmer and warrior, and his wife Binta, a woman of quiet grace and unwavering faith. The Mandinka people of Jufra lived in harmony with the rhythms of the land and the river. Their days began with the first call to prayer at dawn, when the village stirred to life under the cool veil of morning mist. Men like Amaro rose to tend the fields of groundnuts, millet, and sorghum, their hoes slicing through the soil in steady, practiced motions, while women pounded rice in wooden mortars or wove baskets from river reeds. Children scampered barefoot across the dusty paths, chasing goats or helping with lighter chores, their laughter mingling with the distant croak of frogs from the Bolongo, the great river that sustained them all. The village was organized around clans, with compounds housing extended families where elders held court under the shade of baobabs, dispensing wisdom and settling disputes with measured words. Faith was the unbreakable thread weaving through every aspect of life. Though rooted in ancient traditions, the Mandinka of this region had embraced Islam generations earlier, blending its teachings with their cultural heritage. The mosque, a simple structure of mud walls and a thatched roof, stood at the village's heart, where the imam led prayers 5 times a day. Boys like the young Kunta were schooled in the Quran from an early age, reciting verses under the guidance of learned teachers, learning not just the words but the discipline of submission to Allah. Yet, the old ways lingered, respect for ancestors, rituals tied to the harvest seasons, and a deep reverence for the natural world. Griots, the revered oral historians and musicians, wandered from compound to compound, strumming the chorus haunting strings as they recited epic tales of kings, migrations from the ancient Mali Empire, and the triumphs of warriors who had forged their people's destiny. Kunta's childhood unfolded in this idyllic yet demanding world. As the firstborn son, he was named with great care after his grandfather, a holy man whose lineage traced back to distant Mauritania, carrying the weight of honor and expectation. From infancy, he was carried on Binta's back as she worked the rice fields, feeling the sway of her steps and hearing the songs she hummed in Mandinka, melodies that spoke of love, loss, and resilience. Amaro taught him the ways of manhood gradually, how to track animals in the surrounding bush, to wrestle with peers in the dusty circles where strength and cunning were honed, and to handle tools with precision. By his early years, Kunta joined the Kafo, the age group of boys, who learned together under strict supervision, herding goats, fetching water from the river, and absorbing lessons in morality, history, and survival. The village pulsed with community bonds stronger than iron. Marriages were arranged to strengthen alliances, festivals marked the rain's arrival with drumming and dance, and manhood training loomed as the ultimate rite for boys approaching their teens. Kunta grew tall and inquisitive, his eyes sharp like a hawk's, absorbing the stories of griots who spoke of Sundiata, the Lion King who founded the great Mali Empire centuries before. He learned to pray facing Mecca, to fast during Ramadan, and to honor the caste system that placed freeborn farmers like his family above artisans and griots, though all contributed to the village's harmony. Women managed the households with authority, cooking hearty meals of groundnut stew and couscous over open fires, while men ventured on trading journeys or protected the community from rare threats. Yet, beneath this serene existence lurked distant shadows. Rumors occasionally drifted upriver of strange pale men on the coast, Tubabs who traded in iron and cloth but hungered for something darker. Jufra, close enough to trading posts yet insulated by its inland position, felt secure in its traditions. Kunta, in his youth, knew only freedom, the vast bush for exploration, the river for fishing, the wrestling grounds for proving valor. He dreamed of becoming a man, of undergoing the sacred initiation that would mark him as a true Mandinka warrior, guardian of his people's pride and faith. This early life forged in Kunta an unyielding sense of self, rooted in the soil of Jufra and the blood of his ancestors. The skills he acquired, hunting with bow and arrow, crafting tools from wood, reciting prayers with devotion, were not mere pastimes but the foundation of an identity that no external force could easily shatter. In the evenings, as families gathered around fires sharing stories under starlit skies, Kunta listened wide-eyed to tales of bravery and migration, internalizing a worldview where honor, family, and Allah guided every step. Little did he know how profoundly this upbringing would arm his spirit against the tempests to come, preserving a flame of African heritage that would defy erasure across oceans and generations. At 17, Kunta Kinte stood on the cusp of manhood, his body lean and hardened from years of wrestling, herding, and labor in the fields. Proud of his growing strength and eager to prove his worth, he often ventured beyond the familiar paths of Jufra, driven by the quiet ambitions of youth. His younger brother, Luman, had been begging for a drum, a goatskin instrument to beat rhythms during village celebrations, and Kunta, as the devoted elder, resolved to craft one himself. He needed good, straight wood from the deeper bush, away from the overharvested groves near the river. With his axe slung over his shoulder and a prayer on his lips for a successful hunt of the perfect tree, he set out alone one morning, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and blooming wildflowers. The forest swallowed him quickly. Tall mahogany and teak trees rose like pillars, their canopies weaving a green ceiling that filtered sunlight into dappled patches on the undergrowth. Vines twisted around trunks, monkeys chattered overhead, and the distant roar of a lion reminded him to stay alert. Kunta moved with the confidence of someone raised in this wilderness, his bare feet silent on the leaf-strewn ground, eyes scanning for the right sapling. He hummed a Mandinka tune under his breath, thinking of how Luman's face would light up, how the drum would echo in the moonlight dances. The village warnings about venturing too far alone echoed faintly in his mind, tales of bandits or wild animals, but at 17, invincibility felt like a birthright. He found the tree eventually, slender, strong, ideal for carving. Swinging his axe with rhythmic precision, chips of wood flew as sweat beaded on his brow under the rising heat. The strikes rang out sharp and clear in the solitude, masking subtler sounds, the rustle of leaves not caused by wind, the snap of twigs under cautious boots. Kunta paused only to wipe his face, oblivious to the eyes watching from the shadows. Slave traders, a mix of African collaborators armed with muskets supplied by European merchants and hardened raiders from distant tribes, had been prowling the region. Fueled by the insatiable demand from coastal forts where ships waited like predators, they targeted isolated villagers, especially strong young men like Kunta whose labor would fetch high prices across the Atlantic. The ambush came without mercy. A net hurled from behind entangled his legs as he bent to gather fallen branches, rough hands seized his arms before he could fully react. Kunta fought fiercely, his warrior training surging through him. He kicked, twisted, roared in rage, landing blows that bloodied one attacker's nose. But numbers overwhelmed him, clubs struck his head and ribs, stunning him into submission. Ropes bit into his wrists, yanking them behind his back, iron manacles, cold, heavy links forged in European factories, snapped around his ankles. Gagged with a filthy cloth to silence his cries for Allah, he was dragged through the underbrush, thorns tearing his skin, his axe left abandoned beside the half-felled tree. The journey to captivity began in agony. Marched for days under guard, chained to a coffle of other unfortunates snatched from nearby villages, Kunta stumbled over roots and rivers, fed scraps barely enough to sustain life. The traders drove them relentlessly toward the coast, beating stragglers, their laughter cruel as they bartered stories of the wealth awaiting them. Kunta's mind reeled in shock and fury, the sacred soil of his ancestors now a prison path, the freedom of Jufra shattered in an instant. He thought of his parents, Amaro's stern lessons in honor, Binta's gentle songs, of his brothers who would search in vain. Rage burned alongside despair, but the chains held firm, a brutal introduction to a commerce that stripped humanity for profit. This violent rupture marked the end of Kunta's world as he knew it, thrusting him into a nightmare engineered by greed that spanned continents. No longer a proud Mandinka youth dreaming of manhood rights, he became commodity, his identity targeted for erasure even as his spirit clung desperately to memories of home. The forest that had nurtured him now echoed only with the clank of shackles, carrying him toward horrors unimaginable, where resistance would become his only tether to the men he refused to let die. After weeks of forced marching in chains, Kunta Kinte and hundreds of other captives from various tribes reached the coast, where the air carried the unfamiliar tang of salt and the roar of waves crashing against unfamiliar shores. Herded into barracoons, dark, stifling pens near the trading forts, they awaited inspection by white men whose pale skin and strange tongues marked them as Tubab, the devils from across the great water. Kunta, bruised and weakened but defiant, watched in horror as families were torn apart during auctions, strong young men like himself separated for their perceived value. In 1767, he was branded with a hot iron on the chest, the searing pain a permanent mark of ownership, before being shoved aboard the British slave ship Lord Ligonier, bound for the colonies. The descent into the hold felt like entering a tomb. Narrow wooden platforms, barely 2 feet high, were stacked in tiers, forcing captives to lie spooned together in rows so tight that turning was impossible. Kunta was chained by wrist and ankle to strangers, men on one side, women and children on another, in a space designed to maximize profit over humanity. Over 300 souls were packed aboard a vessel meant for far fewer, the air thick with the stench of unwashed bodies, fear, and waste. No light penetrated except faint slivers from hatches above, and the rocking of the ship on the Atlantic amplified every misery. The Lord Ligonier set sail in summer, embarking on the infamous Middle Passage, a voyage that could last 2 to 3 months, where survival was never guaranteed. Conditions deteriorated rapidly. Fed meager portions of horse beans, yams, or rice slop twice a day, often spoiled and infested with weevils, captives suffered constant hunger, their bodies wasting away. Water was rationed stingily, tainted and warm, leading to rampant thirst. Dysentery and smallpox swept through the hold like invisible predators, turning the floors into slicks of vomit, blood, and excrement that crew members hosed down sporadically with seawater, offering little relief. The heat below deck was suffocating, especially as they crossed the equator, where temperatures soared and sweat mingled with sores from lying on bare planks. Chains chafed skin raw, breeding infections that festered untreated. Kunta witnessed deaths daily, a man beside him succumbing to fever, his body rigid in rigor before being hauled up and tossed overboard without ceremony, food for sharks that trailed the ship in grim procession. Rebellions flickered sporadically. On some ships, captives coordinated uprisings, but aboard the Lord Ligonier, fear and weakness suppressed open revolt, though whispers of resistance passed in native tongues. Crew members, armed with whips and pistols, forced to dancing on deck for exercise, chained captives made to jump and move to prevent stiffness, under threat of lashings. Women faced additional horrors, often assaulted by sailors during these brief exposures to air. Suicide attempts were common, some starved themselves or leaped into the sea when unchained momentarily. Kunta clung to life through sheer will, reciting silent prayers to Allah, drawing strength from memories of Jafra's open skies and his family's voices, refusing to let despair claim him entirely. The psychological torment matched the physical. Languages divided the captives, Mandinka, Fulani, Wolof, and others, hindering unity, while the constant moan of suffering eroded hope. Kunta saw proud warriors reduced to shadows, their eyes hollow with grief for lost freedoms. Mortality rates soared. On many voyages, a quarter or more perished, their bodies consigned to the deep as the ship pressed onward for profit. Yet amid the dehumanization, small acts of solidarity emerged, sharing scant food, comforting the ill, or humming lullabies in the dark. As weeks blurred into months, landfall finally neared, but the ordeal had etched irreversible scars on body and spirit. Kunta emerged weaker, diseased in body perhaps, but with his inner resolve tempered like iron in fire, a testament to the millions who endured this engineered hell yet carried fragments of their humanity across the ocean. After surviving the unimaginable horrors of the Middle Passage, the Lord Ligonier finally dropped anchor in Annapolis, Maryland, in September 1767. Kunta Kinte, gaunt and scarred from months in the hold, was among the survivors herded onto the dock under the glaring sun and curious eyes of prospective buyers. The air buzzed with the callous commerce of human lives, auctioneers barking prices, planters prodding muscles and teeth like livestock, families shattered in an instant as bids rose. Kunta stood tall despite his weakness, his spirit unbowed, as a Virginia planter named John Waller purchased him for his Spotsylvania County tobacco plantation. To Waller and his overseers, this strong young African was prime labor, destined to toil endlessly in the fields. Transported southward in chains, Kunta arrived at the plantation, a sprawling expanse of rolling fields where enslaved men, women, and children bent over endless rows of tobacco plants under the watchful eye of armed overseers. Quarters were crude cabins of logs and mud, meals sparse cornmeal and salt pork, days dawn to dusk labor pruning, hoeing, and harvesting the lucrative crop that fueled colonial wealth. But from the first moment his new master addressed him, the deepest assault began, not on his body alone, but on his very identity. "Your name is Toby now," Waller declared, a common English name imposed to erase African heritage and assert total dominion. Kunta stared back in silent fury, responding only with his true name, Kunta Kinte. This refusal ignited a war of wills. Time and again, when called Toby, Kunta corrected them fiercely, "I am Kunta Kinte," earning brutal repercussions. The whip cracked across his back, lashes drawing blood in rituals meant to break resistance. Overseers tied him to a post, delivering dozens of strokes while demanding submission, yet each time he rose, bloodied but defiant, repeating his Mandinka name like a prayer to Allah and his ancestors. The plantation's other enslaved people watched in hushed awe. Many had long surrendered their original names for survival, but this newcomer from across the water clung to his with a ferocity that stirred forbidden hope. Kunta's rebellion extended beyond words. Seizing opportunities in the vast Virginia wilderness, he escaped multiple times, navigating by stars and rivers toward a dreamed-of freedom north or perhaps even back across the ocean. Captured each time by patrollers with dogs, he faced escalating punishments, more whippings, iron collars, confinement in stocks. After his fourth attempt, the fury of the system reached its cruelest peak. Bound and held down, Kunta endured the unthinkable. An overseer wielding an axe severed the front half of his right foot, a common mutilation for repeat runaways to hobble future flight while preserving labor value. Agony seared through him as blood soaked the earth, the blade's chop echoing his screams, yet even in that moment of unimaginable pain, he refused to cry out the hated name. The amputation crippled his body, forcing him to hobble on a crutch through remaining years of forced toil, tending gardens rather than heavy field work. Physically broken, the plantation owners believed they had finally crushed his spirit. But Kunta's defiance burned inward now, a sacred fire no lash or blade could extinguish. His African soul, forged in Jafra's freedom, tempered by the Middle Passage as hell, remained intact, whispering his true name in silent moments, preserving the essence of who he was against a world determined to obliterate it. Years after the amputation that stole half his foot and confined him to lighter duties like gardening and driving the master's carriage, Kunta Kinte, still known to the world as Toby, found a fragile glimmer of light in the darkness of bondage. Sold to a new master, Dr. William Waller, brother of his original owner, he was moved to a neighboring plantation where life, though still brutal, allowed small mercies. A fiddler named Fiddler became his unlikely friend, teaching him fragments of English while respecting his silences, and the community of enslaved people offered quiet solidarity in stolen moments after exhausting labor. But the greatest shift came when Kunta, now in his 30s, formed a bond with Belle, an enslaved woman who worked as the cook. Strong-willed and perceptive, she saw through his guarded exterior to the proud Mandinka beneath, and in time, they married in a simple ceremony among the quarters, jumping the broom as was the custom when legal unions were denied. Their daughter, Kizzy, was born around 1790, a bright-eyed child whose arrival stirred something fierce and protective in Kunta. Though the system sought to sever all ties to Africa, banning native languages, religions, and names under threat of punishment, Kunta refused to let his heritage die with him. In whispered evenings by the dim glow of a cabin fire, when overseers slept and the plantation quieted, he drew Kizzy close and began to teach her the forbidden truths. "Your name is Kizzy," he would say softly, "but listen well, for I have a greater gift." He spoke his true name aloud for the first time in years, Kunta Kinte, rolling the syllables in Mandinka cadence, making her repeat it until it lodged in her young memory like a sacred seed. He shared fragments of Jafra's world, the flowing Gambia river he called Kami Balongo, the call of the muezzin at prayer times, the wrestling matches among boys training for manhood. He taught her Mandinka words, for river, moon, family, Allah, terms that carried the weight of a lost freedom. Stories of ancestors, griots singing epics under baobab trees, the rhythms of drums that once celebrated harvests and rites, these he passed in hushed tones, warning her never to speak them where white ears might hear. Belle, though born in America, supported this quiet rebellion, understanding that in a world designed to erase origins, these words were armor for the soul. Kizzy absorbed it all with wide-eyed wonder, her father's voice a bridge across the ocean that had stolen him. This act of transmission was defiance in its purest form. Laws and lashes could maim the body, impose new names, forbid education, but they could not police every midnight whisper between parent and child. Kunta knew his physical resistance had cost him dearly, the escapes, the whippings, the mutilation, but this covert preservation struck at the heart of the system's goal, total cultural annihilation. By entrusting his language and lineage to Kizzy, he ensured that the name Kunta Kinte would survive, hidden yet alive, ready to be carried forward. When Kizzy grew and later had her own children, she in turn passed the stories down, the words evolving but the essence enduring through generations of separation, sales, and suffering. In this way, Kunta's Unbreakable will achieve a victory the masters never anticipated. Physically subdued, he triumphed spiritually, forging an invisible chain of memory stronger than any iron shackle. His legacy became a quiet revolution, one that would centuries later resurface through his descendant Alex Haley, proving that the human spirit, rooted in truth and shared in secret, could outlast empires built on denial.